welcome to the EMEA Recruitment Podcast, produced in partnership with Operation Smile. We're hoping to raise vital funds for Operation Smile to provide free surgery to children born with cleft lip and palate. If you're able to support this cause, please visit emearecruitment.com/operation-smile. In this episode, we speak to Cyrille Desbazeille, Chief Procurement Officer at Franke in Zurich. He discusses the freedom of working in the procurement function.
So hello everybody, welcome to the next episode of the EMEA Recruitment Podcast in partnership as ever with our good friends over at Operation Smile. As my colleague Rose has just mentioned, we're delighted to welcome Cyrille onto the show today. So hopefully you can still hear me okay, Cyrille?
Absolutely fine. Yes, all good.
Perfect. And we've just been talking offline about what you've been up to in the last few days. I know you're just back from holiday, so I'm guessing the answer to the usual first question, what was the last thing that made you smile, should in theory be something related to your holiday, I guess.
Well, I'm just back from holidays today, so I'm smiling, but I probably smiled much more last week. And I think if there's something which got me to smile was the new directives for bin garbage sorting in my village in France. It's crazy. So really, if you don't have a PhD, it's very difficult to understand where you're supposed to put which garbage in which trash bin. So that really made me smile. And I realized it must be difficult for people who are getting a little older to understand what they're supposed to do with their trash bin.
Okay. So it's so you come back, and that's one thing you've learned from your trip, then, huh? That's the new recycle laws of France.
Yes, absolutely.
No, that's it. I think obviously at the moment it's I'd say maybe in the last three and a half years we've all had some challenging times and situations that we've been going through, but obviously want to try and keep as positive as we possibly can. So I thought I'd ask you, what it feels like at the moment to be the Chief Procurement Officer at Franke, because as Rose mentioned, that you've had some great success in this position, and I thought to try and start the podcast in a very positive way, we'd ask you what it feels like to be in this role currently.
How does it looks like being CPO of Franke? Well, I guess unfortunately not very different from many other business in terms of, as you say, challenges, crises. We moved from the shortage crisis to the price inflation crisis, and now we see the top line being under challenge. So I guess it's like in many other organizations, there's probably a few things which are different. Franke is privately owned, so we are not really constrained quarter after quarter on the results. Don't get me wrong. I mean, our owners still expect results, but we probably look at it in a slightly more longer time horizon. And then I guess the business continuity is really key, as of many other companies. One difference is that we probably have a very good cash position, so that definitely helps in this tough timing. I think the biggest challenge for us is that we're not as famous as big organizations, so we don't have a name which necessarily attracts talent people, and that comes as an additional layer of difficulty on top of all the other common difficulties. So I think navigating this tough period where you have also difficulties to attract people is a challenge. Having said that, I'm very happy because I had and I'm still having some successes of people joining the organization, bringing fantastic knowledge and different point of view. So that really helps.
No, that's good to hear. And also we'll talk a little bit later on about people and recruitment, which probably won't be a surprise to you given the nature of the EMEA recruitment business. I think we've got to ask you something related to recruitment in the show. And I mean, I thought before we kind of lead into that, so I thought just to explore a bit more, because you mentioned Franke being a privately owned business. I mean, obviously in the past you've worked for Coty and Danone, two very well-known brands, giants really in the markets. So I mean, how does it compare, do you think? I mean, in terms of the culture and the way of working. I mean, what's been the challenges and the learning curves for you?
I think, I mean, one thing I've learned first, as you said, after my long experience in Danone and Coty in listed company, I really wanted to try something different. So that's why it's not by accident that I moved to Franke, which is a non-listed organization. I wanted to see if things were, I mean, different and would drive a different culture. My learning is that the culture is not driven by your ownership and the shareholder structure. I think the culture is more driven by people who really leading this organization. And I think if you're part of this leadership team, you've got a key role to play. Of course, you don't change things overnight, and that's probably the most frustrating part of shifting a culture of an organization, is that it takes time and it takes resilience. And I think, but once the willingness is there, once you are progressively creating the critical mass in the organization by adding different point of view perspectives, people with different experience, you can really move the needle. And I see that more happening in Franke than what I saw in Coty. In Coty, for example, the culture there was not one culture, in fact, because when I joined, there was a merge of two different organizations. One was Coty, the other one was ex-P&G brands, with completely opposite cultural approach, which ended up with having no culture, because once you have not one culture, you have no culture. A culture is not a sum of different culture, is one thing which is clearly embedded in an organization. And here I can see the difference. There's a shift, there's an evolution of the culture, but there's a very strong willingness and intention from the management to harmonize and really create this new one Franke, where what used to be three different divisions led in a completely different ways are now merging into one value of the brand everywhere and value of the people everywhere also. So I think that's super important, and that for me very interesting to be part of this transformation.
No, and I think within that you touched on quite a few important things there, but one of the things that jumps out to me is the fact that when companies are looking to do transformation in any shape or form, really, you've got to have the top level individuals and the management really bought into the idea, so then it is driven, at least initially, by them. And as you say, that's why it's an exciting time at Franke at the moment, with the idea of the one Franke coming through and the shared vision and values is only going to be beneficial for the business, but for yourself, other people who are there now, but also attracting talents in the future as well. So a lot of really positive and exciting things going on there. And I know you mentioned within the answer about one of the things that attracted you to the business was it's a culture that's driven by people. And I noted on your LinkedIn profile, actually, you've got a passion for people development and the construction of strong teams. So this is where the culture of Franke and your passion, links and matches quite well. So I thought I'd try to look into that a little bit more. So, I mean, where does this passion of people development come from for you?
Well, I guess then it goes back to my roots in Danone. I mean, Danone is known for being this famous, and we've heard a lot of that recently because it was the 50th anniversary of the famous speech of Ribou, the father, Antoine, in Marseille, where he was really claiming that you cannot have success in a company without the success of the people. So there was a really intimate link between employees' success and company success. So that was 50 years ago. Now it's everywhere. But that's something which was really live in the Danone I've known, where investing on people for the long run was key. And what does that mean? That means when you recruit someone, you're recruiting someone not for one job, you're recruiting from someone for minimum 2 jobs. Ideally, you see them already during the interview. You can say, okay, perhaps they will develop up to this level. And of course, it's never granted, it's never guaranteed in any way, but the ambition is to really find people where you say, okay, I see a potential, I see someone who can bring a different point of view, a different perspective versus the team I currently have. I also think if you're having children force you to think of developing people, because when you raise your children, it's because you want them to become the best they can be, not what you would like them to be, but what they can be best at. I think in developing people, you're not doing anything different. I think the only difference at one point of stage is that does the evolution of the person allows the company to do its best also, while in a family, you keep your children and they'll do whatever they want, they will remain there, your children. So I think that's the only difference. For the rest, making sure that people will do their best and will develop at best of their capabilities is the same challenge when you're raising children. So there's a lot of similarities.
No, it's true, and I think the idea behind it, trying to bring people into the business or your specific team based on potential and cultural fits. I mean, there's not many people that would argue with that way of working. It's definitely the best way of trying to recruit and retain people. I guess the big challenge behind it is it always with that way of working. It's almost fighting against the culture of the world at the moment. Everybody wants overnight success. People want instant results and adds the pressure then to deliver quicker. So you see it in work, you see it in sports. If people aren't being hired or bought for a football team and they're not doing their job, then very quickly they're out of either job or they're sold on. And I think that's a bit of the challenge that we have. I mean, do you find it can be quite frustrating, then on that side, because obviously, as you say, the way you want to work is ideal and most people would agree with it, but it's also a bit of a challenge in today's society that people want overnight success and wants recognition instantly rather than waiting for it. That's a bit of the challenge you go through.
Yes, absolutely yes. And here you made me smile, unfortunately, because I've just had last week the resignation of one great guy. And I think we had this long discussion around, you're capable of growing. There's no doubt. But if I'm changing you after 18 months in your job, you've delivered things for sure, but I'm sure you'll not deliver up to what you could deliver at your best. So I would like you to stay one more year. I think I've convinced his brain, did not convince his heart. And I lost him. And to your point, there's always this challenge of we want things immediately. I think there are even the best talented people will only deliver at their best after 18 months to 2 years. And then after 2.5 years, they probably need to move on. But now when you speak about time horizon of 2 years of development, as you rightly say, people will tell you, well, you know what, I want it today. Well, actually, I wanted it yesterday, so today is already too late. So it's absolutely a challenge. Everything's moving fast. People are learning fast. I'm not disputing that, but delivering because of the context still takes some time. And I'm convinced that if you don't take time to stay and learn from your mistakes in one job, it's very difficult to bring your learning from your mistakes in the next job. Because then there is a risk of and again, I'm not saying people will fail by taking a new job, not at all. Sometimes some will be extremely successful, but for the organization, for the benefit of the company you're working for, of course, you want people who are at their best. And as I said, they're probably at their best after 18 months in the job. So you need to make this learning curve faster and exciting for people, that they don't have the impression that they're still in their learning curve. They are already delivering while learning how to deliver more.
Hi everybody, it's Paul Thomas here. I hope that you're well and you're enjoying the podcast so far. Thank you once again for your continued support listening to the podcast. I just wanted to break into the recording to talk to you about a really exciting partnership that EMEA Recruitment has along with Operation Smile. And as founder of EMEA Recruitment, it's an honour and a privilege to announce this partnership. Personally, I was born with a cleft lip and palate, so the mission of Operation Smile is something that I have a strong personal connection with. It's not an understatement to say that the dentists and surgeons that helped me were life changers. It's not only about the actual operations that take place, the support and care post and pre-operation are beyond value, and from personal experience I can only say that I'd not be the confident, happy person I am today without this support. I want to help children experience the support and care and skill that I experienced on my journey, and hope that we can do this along with Operation Smile. Every 3 minutes a child is born with a cleft lip or cleft palate, and the mission of Operation Smile is to provide help and support to these children through providing 6,000 medical volunteers across 80 countries who are dedicated to help these children with facial conditions, most commonly cleft lip and cleft palate. More than 200,000 children are born with a cleft every year, and they are often unable to speak, eat, socialise or even smile. However, it can take as little as 45 minutes and cost just €180 or 182 francs for Operation Smile to provide a child with life-changing surgery. Now, in partnership with Operation Smile, EMEA Recruitment is raising valuable funds and aiming to create 100 new smiles to support the organisation to provide free surgeries for children and young adults all over the world. Please help us by donating through the link in the bio, or get in touch to see how your company can help get involved too. For the moment, I'll leave you to carry on listening to the rest of the podcast, but if there's anything I can do in terms of answering any questions or finding out how you can help and support EMEA Recruitment and Operation Smile, then please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you once again, and enjoy the rest of the podcast.
No, it's true, and I think it's. I think I find it quite sad that that's where we are at the moment. You know, that it used to be people join a company for a career, you know, like you did yourself at Danone, especially. You had 16 years roughly in that business, and experienced a whole range of different positions, different locations. Really became a figurehead in that business, and that type of progression, it doesn't happen overnight, but it also doesn't happen if you just move around from one company to another every 2 years. But it does feel like that's the type of market that we're in now, and it's even that 2 year, 18 months to 2 year time frame that has reduced, because I think, you know, when we were having these kind of discussions 3 or 4 years ago, we would have probably said actually 3 years is probably about right. You know, you have 1 year settling in, 1 year to get to make a mark, and then 1 year to learn and improve. And most people would say, well, 3 years at that time, and now, you know, it's now reduced to 18 months to 2 years. So it's difficult for anybody looking to hire, but also I think it's a challenge for people to to be patient and to accept that learning is a big part of how you become better and stronger in your role. I think if your aim is to become a chief procurement officer, you become a much better and stronger chief procurement officer if you put 20 plus years into the experience. But you can be a CPO after 10 years of a smaller business, but whether you're going to be a great CPO is another matter. So it's a big challenge really for people hiring, for companies, and for people looking for work at the moment. So I guess linked to that, are there any steps that you put in place when you are recruiting? Is there anything you really focus on in order to get this efficient and effective way of finding the right people for you?
I think, it all starts with the recruitment manager. I think, and I say that because it's super important that this recruitment manager realize that the balance of power shifts, and it's no longer that we are recruiting people, but when we're recruiting, we're selling ourselves. We're selling our organization. We're explaining what's going to be different if they join Franke. And I think there's one sentence I tend to say quite often in Franke, which is, here, if you want to make an impress in the organization and leave something after you join, it's probably the place to come. If you go to one of these big multinational giants, yes, you will have very probably comfortable position. You will have easy, I'm not saying easy, but more specialized role, but it's going to be much more difficult to leave something different versus where you found things when you join. In Franke, that's key. And I think for the young generation who are looking for having sense, and then, giving sense to a job can have many different meanings. How do you give sense to your life? How do you give sense to your job? We could argue and debate for a long time, but already leaving something different versus where you found them when you arrived is, for me, giving a lot of sense, because then you realize that the job you've done has moved the needle, and therefore it's very tangible to realize that without you, things would have been different. And that's, for me, a key selling factor for people who are wondering, is it the right time to join a smaller organization or less organized organization? I think it's always when you have some form of unorganized, I don't want to say chaos because it's not a chaos, but unorganized, that you can bring some clarity in an easier way than when you have things which are completely structured, because then you need to break the structure. And breaking the structure is much more difficult than just finding the way and navigating through an unstructured world, which, by the way, is becoming the new norm. Thinking that you will work and live in a structured world is gone. So you need to learn how to navigate in less structured environment. And from this point of view, Franke is very powerful and really helps you. And I think back to your question of what do I sell to people who are willing to join? How do I make sure that I attract the people I'm looking for? It's clearly one of the selling proposition. The job will have the shape you're willing to give it. And I think this agility in the job description is super important. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying no job description, because we're not in a world where yet everything is flat and everybody is doing whatever he wants. But I think a job description with unclear or voluntarily undefined boundaries, it's probably more attracting than things which are extremely clear and rationalized from day one.
No, I think that's it. And I think these days, as you say, people are at ease with the fact that, or let's say most people are at ease with the fact that we are in this unstructured world, and I think if there are job profiles out there that are just extremely detailed with every possible bullet point listed, then it actually puts people off. I think having a job profile that is 80% there, but there's 20% of uncertainty, it's a selling point, but it's also the exciting part of what people like, most people like about their roles, which I think is a good point for you to raise there as well. I think one of the other challenges really in not just procurement, but I think for most disciplines is trying to kind of catch people at the start of their career. The industries like BI and data and IT, they're more attractive maybe for some of the younger generation when they're thinking of where to start their careers, and some of the more established disciplines like procurement, supply chain, finance, HR, they're not always at the top of people's lists when they're looking at careers. So for someone starting out their career in procurement or looking to go into procurement, is there any advice you might share?
If they are already willing to come to procurement, I will tell them it's a fantastic idea. You understood everything much faster than your peers. For some people who don't have this idea, and it's interesting because we hosted a month ago, not even 3 weeks ago, we had 150 students from the St. Gallen MBA joining for a day of on-site during their course on management. So I was facing 2-3 groups because they were split in different groups, and then I had the opportunity to discuss during small speed datings what do they want to do, what their plan in their career. And to your point, I think the vast majority is considering consulting. The other vast majority is considering banking. Very few were even considering industry altogether. And when I'm putting industry, I would put FMCG. They are really considering that continuation of their studies is consulting, which probably is a good way to look at things. Probably not so good for the consulting company who would lose their talented people after a couple of years, because then they would consider they have finished their studies. But then to convince them, I think there's one thing super important in procurement. The full organization in a company is dedicated to sales, and therefore you've got a lot of supporting function, marketing, finance, even manufacturing are all looking at sales and top line, which makes absolute sense. Procurement is the only functions facing upstream, and in most of the companies there's a lot of freedom in dealing with the upstream part. We are here looking at the vast market of potential suppliers, the one we know, the one we don't even know, and it leaves a lot of freedom versus sales, which are much more defined and clusterized by the whole organization. As I said, the whole organization is facing and looking downstream. Only procurement is looking upstream, procurement and somehow R&D. That's true, because also R&D is looking at new products, and therefore they're discussing with suppliers, which gives some friction from time to time on defining who does what with suppliers upstream. But that's part of the job. But as I said, procurement leaves much more freedom than sales or even finance. I mean, if you had freedom in finance, people would know it. For me, that's why it's, and by the way, it's super complex and super complete, because you're really looking at the end-to-end more and more. You're also in charge whenever there are customer complaints, and it goes back to suppliers. So it's your full scope of responsibility to find the right people, the right suppliers for the total quality of products and or service that you're looking for your customers. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely a very complex and a very exciting job.
No, I mean, I think you summarised it really well there. To be honest, I think the fact that you've got the complexity in the role, you've got to be good at dealing with people. I mean, you mentioned suppliers, sales individuals, finance. You've got to be good at business partnering and managing communications on that side. And as you say, the upstream side of it is exciting. And I think ultimately it is a discipline. Going back to what you mentioned a bit earlier on, you can leave a legacy behind. You can leave tangible results behind, if especially in the current environment where supply chain and procurement is having there's a lot of pressure on everybody in that area in companies right now. And if you can come in and make an impact, then people are going to think very highly of you, especially at this moment in time as well. And I think one of the other kind of, let's say, changes that's going on generally, and it obviously is impacting procurement, is the amount of impacts that business intelligence and data is having on our lives. And I was wondering, do you see the impacts of BI and data much on procurement yet, or do you think, and how do you think procurement's going to look in the future as the impacts increases, really?
In fairness, in Franke, I would be lying saying I'm seeing it yet, right? But I think it's not only in Franke. Now, what I'm convinced of is, while for a long period you could deal with Excel, in the sense that the famous Pareto rule of 80-20 would have worked for everything. That's true. It's still true to a large extent, but the problem is that in a world which is not stable, sometimes it's a very minor things which going to disrupt your full supply or create nightmare in terms of prices. So something which would not have been on the radar can be source of a big issues and a big impact on your supply chain. So you cannot now work only with the 80-20. Having said that, the complexity of the world says that you cannot also increase the size of your team to deal with these small items which are not critical. Therefore, you need to replace them by artificial intelligence or whatever you name it, data extraction, business intelligence, which will help you to do this safe transactional business, even though it's not critical in terms of spend, it's not critical at first sight in terms of value, but it might be critical in terms of impact on your supply. And therefore, because of that, you need to have systems which will allow you to spot which is the product you're using in 90% of your spend, but costs peanuts because you use it at extremely low rate. And if you add that, and if you know it only for your tier one, it's fantastic. But then imagine if you need to extrapolate that to tier two or tier three, then it's just not feasible. And therefore, you need systems which will allow you to take care of these basic things, making sure that you've got a level of confidence in your supply without investing a humongous amount of resource, because as I said, otherwise you can put one person behind each spend, but I don't think any organization is willing to do that. So it will be key. By the way, it will be key, and it will make the job of procurement even more interesting, because then if you've got the transactional basic part managed by robots or AI, it will leave you the exciting part of the strategic thinking fed by this simple information coming from BI.
No, I mean, that is, as you say, I mean, I think it adds to the excitement of the discipline. It's a challenge or a resource that's definitely going to become more and more available. And it's how the discipline adapts to those challenges and what it can bring, into the business. So I think you mentioned there the 80-20 rule, Pareto's law there, and I was going to kind of ask you if you relate some of this thinking to your own life as well. Obviously, you've had a hugely successful career, and in your role, I guess time is always under pressure. You have so many things to do and so many people wanting your attention. And then you mentioned your children earlier, you've got a busy family life. Are you someone who's quite strong at managing your time and focus and priorities, maybe using the 80-20 principle on outside of work?
I'm not sure I'm strong, but I'm sure I've always been extremely clear on what are my priorities. Okay. And surprisingly enough, my priorities have always been my family. Okay. And of course, then you could say I've been successful in my career. Yes, I think I've been. So that's the big priority. But then when it comes to work, it's this principle of, okay, what's important? Where can I really bring some value versus where I will do something which, it needs to be done, but if it's not done, will it change the life of the company? Probably not. So it's super helpful to do that. It's also extremely difficult because there's always temptation and people asking you, well, can you join this? Can you do that? I think it's this famous book of essentialism, trying to define what's important and sticking to that. So then when you say yes, that means you're saying no to many other things. But it's a choice, because at the end of the day, you always need to trade off. So either you decide on the trade-off yourself, or the trade-offs are imposed by someone else on yourself. So it sounds easy. It's not that easy when you have to say no, because closing door, particularly in a world where, as we said earlier, is extremely volatile and changing quickly, you're never sure that you're closing the right door, but at least it helps you to protect your agenda and ultimately your health, because you cannot be everywhere at the same time.
No, I think this ties up with what you were talking about earlier in terms of people's careers and not wanting everything overnight. This is a scenario that you're in that probably at the time didn't feel like a nice situation to be in, but what you've learned off the back of that is something that you're going to take with you through the rest of your career, and I think that it's that those learning curves that make you a strong chief procurement officer now. In the likely event you're in that same situation again, you'll be able to fall back on that experience that you've already had, and I think it does tie in well with that as highlighting that earlier on, that nothing really can replace good solid experience to progress the career in the right way.
Yeah, and just to come back on this experience, I think there's one learning and one thing which is a good insight, is that for sure but when I say the whole organization was completely aligned on this being a priority, from the top management down to the last operator in the plant, and then it makes a big difference. Absolutely.
No, I think that's huge. We talked about that relating to the culture of business and any changes or transformation that happen. I think you've got to have the top people involved first for them all to be on the same page, because if there's any breaks in that link, then very often these things don't work out at the end of the day. I think everyone's got to see the management team are all pushing in the same direction, otherwise the cracks start to appear. So but I think it's been amazing having you as a guest on the podcast today, Cyrille. I know the network will take a lot from it. I've really enjoyed the conversation myself, and hopefully you have too. And I was wondering, if any of the network wants to reach out to you, what's the easiest way they can do that? Well, would it be on LinkedIn?
Yeah, linking is fine. And by the way, I absolutely enjoyed the discussion also. It's a good way to come back to the office, I have to say. It takes you in and out already, but no, it was great. So if anybody wants to contact me, no problem. Linking is absolutely fine. No issue with that.
Perfect. Well, what we'll do when we put the podcast on LinkedIn, we'll make sure we put a link to your profile so it's easy for people to connect with you. And I think there'll be a lot of people wanting to do that. So yeah, thanks again. Huge thanks again for your time. So really enjoyed it. As you say, good start to the week. We're recording this first thing on the Monday, really. So I'm glad it's been a nice kind of easy return from the holiday for you. And yeah, hope the first week back is a good one.
Thank you very much, and same to you. Have a great week ahead, and let's keep in touch.
Will do. Thanks, Cyrille. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye, Paul.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast episode. If you'd like to reach out to Paul or myself, please feel free to send a connection through on LinkedIn. And if you'd like to listen to previous episodes of the podcast, you can find them all at our website, www.emearecruitment.eu.